This is the Leadership Foundry podcast. I'm your co-host this week, Brandon Smith, and joining me on the show this week is my other co-host and co-founder, Randy Hain. And today we're going to be talking about the opportunity for all of us as managers and leaders to more effectively lead and coach Gen Z as they enter into the workforce and continue to enter into the workforce. What can we be doing to really nurture and grow them and support them and create connection with this very, very critical generation? And to join us on this conversation, we get to bring back one of our good friends, Tim Elmore, who is the Generation Guru. If you're not familiar with Tim, he is the founder of Growing Leaders, an Atlanta-based nonprofit organization created to develop emerging leaders. He has been doing this work for well over 20 years, has written well over 40 books in this space, and we are going to talk about how we lead and manage Gen Z. He's going to talk about his latest book, The Future Begins with Z, 9 Strategies to Lead Generation Z as they upset the workplace. So as we go through this journey, I know you're going to hear so many wonderful things from Tim. He talks about the importance of curiosity and connection. Really take notes. At the very end of our conversation, Randy and I will reconvene. We'll share some of our greatest hits from the conversation, our big takeaways, as you think about what you can put in place to help not only you, but your Gen Z teams grow and thrive starting tomorrow. Tim, so good to have you back on the show, my friend, and really excited to talk about your new book, The Future Begins with Z, New Strategies to Lead Generation Z as they disrupt the workplace. Tim, welcome. And joining us, of course, is my co-host and co-founder, Randy Hain. And we are just so excited about the conversation here today.
I am too. It's going to be fun. Good to see you, Randy.
Good to see you as well, my friend.
So, Tim, we've had you on the show. I can't tell you how many times at this point, but for some folks who might be new listeners, they may not know you. So let's start off with maybe just a little bit about you. Share a little bit about the great work you've been doing for so many decades at this point, and what led you to this book.
I think you're calling me old, are you not, Brandon?
Experience, my friend.
Okay.
Wise.
We're going to assume that's a positive comment. No, I'll tell you what, the best way to describe my career is I have always been about the next generation. I started in the classroom as a teacher in the 1979-1980 school year. I was still finishing up my college degree, but I started my master's work and I was a teacher's aide and started teaching. And even though I was the next generation, I thought to myself, even then, 45 years ago, I want to pour my life into the next generation. They were moldable. They were idealistic. They were ready to learn. They were ready to, I like to say, charge hell with a water pistol, that sort of spirit. So fast forward, by 1983, I had graduated and I went on staff with John Maxwell. And of course, John's this leadership guru, but my love of the next gen and my love of leadership got married in the 80s and 90s. So by the turn of the century, 2003 to be exact, I started an organization called Growing Leaders, which was all about how do we equip the next gen to take their place, to stand on our shoulders. And Randy, you were so kind early on. You joined our board and said, let me help this guy here. He needs help. So we have known each other for years, and our heartbeat has always been, how do we get them ready to not just graduate school, but to be ready to lead? So that's kind of my heartbeat in a nutshell.
And so naturally, it would make sense why this book was on your radar.
Yeah.
But was there any particular impetus or spark which really brought you to say, I need to write this book?
Yeah, there was. Actually, it was a series of events. One, and this is anecdotal, but I just kept bumping into hiring managers and supervisors at workplaces who were frustrated rather than fascinated with this 22-year-old that was joining their staff. They were so different. I think different is a good adjective. It's not bad. It's not good. They were just coming in different. And yet they came in hot oftentimes, where they had a voice about what we ought to do here and how we ought to view politics and this, that, and the other. So there were some 48-year-old managers that were saying, what in the world? But more so than that, fellas, I saw something that was both magic and tragic about this new generation. In fact, let me tell you a quick story. Colin is a next gen guy. He's in his 20s. I met Colin when he was in high school in Gwinnett County, just north of Atlanta. Colin went off to MIT to get his degree, and so he's very, very intelligent. After he graduated, he went on staff at General Motors. In fact, he was put in their smart car division. He's very smart himself. But less than a year in, he was seeing how this long established organization called General Motors could update their ways, could maybe upgrade how they do professional development and how they could do this or that. You can imagine Colin had some brilliant ideas. So he took them to his supervisor, and without being too cruel, his supervisor pretty much shut him down and said, hey, just keep your nose to the grindstone. You don't really get to have a say and be an influencer here for 8 years. That's what he told him, 8 years. Mm-hmm. So Colin went back to his desk and continued to work, but Colin wasn't done yet. So get this. Colin had the audacity to email Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, and just said, hey, just had some ideas. Well, Mary gets back to him, this, first year employee, and says, hey, these are great ideas. So she takes him to her executive team. They all agree. These are really good ideas. And it was a number of ideas. But as the ideas went from the executive committee meeting or team meeting down to the middle managers and finally to his supervisor, it got stuck again. And Colin was told, just keep your nose to the grindstone, just do your work. Don't speak up, just show up. And that was not good enough for Colin. And to make a long story short, in less than a year, Colin quit GM and started 2 companies. He's now a millionaire in his 20s. And I guess I share that story. Not everybody's Colin and not everybody's GM, but I think it's a picture of we can get stuck in the way we've done things. I can. And here's this new, intelligent, sharp young man or woman that shows up, and we're not willing to maybe listen when we ought to be listening and to give them a place. I think GM could have kept Colin. I really do. Had they let him have a little bit more influence in that first year. So anyway, those were the impetuses that made me think I've got to create a bit of an encyclopedia for leaders especially, but anybody over 45 who might say, I don't know if I get these kids, and yet I know I should. So that's kind of what sparked me to start writing here.
Tim,
I love that. Yeah, Randy, please.
No, it's interesting, Tim. As Brandon said, we have had you on the show many times, but every time you come, you've got this new, amazing deep dive into another dimension of generations in the workplace. So you're the guru of all things generational, but this is just another incredible deep dive, and so timely and so necessary. Now, I've got a question for you. It's not a trick question.
Okay.
But as I was thinking about getting ready for today, I Googled just blog posts and articles on Gen Z.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands and thousands. People are finally starting to pay attention. I love that your new book is really narrowing in on how do we effectively lead them?
Yeah.
How do we lead them, engage them, and help them be successful? So your new book seems a little different than some of the noise that I'm seeing out there, and it seems very timely. Comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. I hope so. I have read, as you can imagine, scads of stuff that's been written, surveys, data, primary research. Mm-hmm. I do a little primary research, but mostly what I think I add to the mix is curating all that research and thinking, what can we do? So here's the big idea in chapter 1 that might be a great appetizer for your listeners here. Remember I mentioned the words tragic and magic, or magic and tragic. Mm-hmm. Here's what I see that is confounding some of us who are seasoned veterans in the workplace. The age of authority seems to be going down, but the age of maturity seems to be going up. And so you can see how that might be a little frustrating to a leader. We look at the first part of that, the age of authority going down. The age of authority is going down because without a badge, they're coming in with some intuition on where culture is going. They come in with incredible savviness on technology and AI and how we could use this. I don't know if you all know this, but 1 out of 8 Gen Zers has already monetized social media. And 1 out of 5, it's a full-time job.
Wow.
So they don't need GM or they don't need Home Depot or whatever. They're figuring out the future. And so that makes us older people go, dadgummit, that sort of thing. But at the same time, what makes it doubly frustrating is they may not come in with some of the soft skills or, career ready skills that we would hope were as little as look me in the eye and shake my hand and let's have a conversation face to face, not through a text message. Now, I don't mean to overspeak, but here's my takeaway. At once, I will tell leaders, you're going to have to listen a little bit more than you used to listen to young team members, but you're going to have to coach a little bit more than you used to coach. And if we're willing to make those steps or take those steps, I think it could be magical. But you can see again, magic and tragic, and we're going to have to be ready for both.
Yeah. Before I throw the ball to Brandon, just to follow up, because I was really drawn into your story about GM and Colin, the young entrepreneur that had so many great ideas. And his supervisor was really living in a world that I think the three of us are probably very familiar with. Rules and barriers and process. And this is the way that we do things around here.
Yeah, it's true.
And what it strikes me about Gen Z is there is no barrier to entry. There is no waiting period. It's like, wait a minute, this is the right thing to do. Why don't we just do it? That is an enormous change.
Yes, it is. You're right. In fact, let me volley back if you don't mind. What makes this difficult for us, and I'll say us as seasoned veterans, is they bring in a lot of experience, but not much job experience. So a typical Gen Zer might have had a mom and dad that very understandably said, just focus on academics. I don't want you getting a job when you're in high school or college, just focus on academics or your sport you're playing. That's all fine. But my gosh, I don't know about you guys, but I worked my way through my teen years. Now it was not a full-time job most of the time, but I got used to interacting with older people, younger people. I was, working at a bank. I was working at an ice cream store. But when I was ready to start my career, I had work experience. And this is not a cut down. It's not an insult. But I think one of the reasons that resumebuilder.com found in their surveys that 4 out of 5 managers find Gen Z the toughest generation to manage is that they've not been managed much yet. And so they come in not even knowing the rules of the game or the terms of engagement. So again, some of that is I got to coach, and I'm a little frustrated that I have to coach you. But if we'll get ready for that, oh my gosh, our future may be golden. They may be the doorway to our future. So I'll stop there, but I feel like that's what I see happening a lot.
Tim, I'm so glad you said that. It reminds me of a talk that you gave some years ago that I was attending, and you talked about, and I think it's important we put a caveat here. We can't put a wide brush on everybody. There's generational variation, of course. But I remember you saying, when there is kind of a lag, like work experience, they're about 8 years behind others. And I remember reading a study that showed in the mid 1990s, 70% of high schoolers had a part-time job at some point. Last time the study was done, 2018, only 30% of high schoolers had a part-time job. So instead of getting that first job at 15, like probably a lot of us did. I know I did. They're waiting till 23. So we've got a little bit of that. But here's my question to you.
Okay.
So their leaders likely are not going to be boomers, not going to be Gen X right out of the gate, probably going to be millennials.
Yes, that's right.
And I know you've done so much work on that generation as well. Where do you see differences between Gen Z and millennials today?
Yeah. Wow. Well, let me just share one big idea and we can kind of play with it. One big difference is millennials, as they grew up, they did almost everything in teams. Now, I'm exaggerating, but almost. They did school projects in teams. They played soccer in teams. We put them in communities. So millennials are very community oriented. Even if they might not have high emotional intelligence, they've learned to do things in community. So there's a give and a take. Gen Z grew up, and while there was some community, if you think about it, remember 2020? And we went through the pandemic and we were all sent home. They got used to learning and playing and doing everything, almost everything, alone. So Gen Z comes in as the most lonely generation globally on record. Loneliness is going up in every generation, which is sad to me because we have better ways of getting connected now than ever, but we're lonely. So here's my big idea here. I think Generation Z enters the workplace different than millennials. They are in a quandary between two poles in their head and heart. On the one side, I want to be me. On the other side, I want to belong. And this I want to be me, I want to belong is what every young person, we had to navigate that, didn't we? I want to get in, I want to have long hair and, blah, blah, blah. And then we realized, there's a give and a take. There's a dance going on here with my boss, and he or she wants me to be myself, but they also need me to be myself on behalf of a bigger organization, a bigger mission. That's hard. So bosses listening right now, I'm telling you, you're going to see a tug between I want to be me and I want to belong. And most of them are perhaps not where the millennials were at their age. And we even struggle a little bit with millennials, if you remember back in the day. But I'm telling you, I even had to talk to my own adult children about this. I want to be, it's humanity's social contract, is it not? It's the social contract. We drive on the right-hand side of the road. We pay money when we get our groceries. We don't steal them because there's a whole big world we got to interact with. And I'm being silly now, but maybe that's a conversation you ought to have with your 20-somethings. How are you doing on this? I want to be me. I want to belong. So I'll stop there.
Tim, I want to piggyback on that a little bit. I love that you went there because I think sort of the next evolution of this conversation is, I think I've heard you describe this as the most anxious generation.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of anxiety, loneliness, anxiety. There's all these mixed feelings, and we could blame a number of sources, but we know it's there. So knowing that, I and Brandon both are always engaging with more of that millennial to young baby boomer generation, that senior leader group.
Yeah.
And we often hear, the kids don't get it. Why don't they do this? There's a lot of finger wagging.
Yeah.
What's wrong with them?
Yeah.
And would you give our audience, our listeners, some of practical tips on how they can engage in the right conversation? Because isn't everything about communication?
Yes.
How do they sit down and have the right conversation? What are some practical tips, some ideas? Because I think that is just the biggest gap that's out there is people don't know what to say, so they ignore the problem and they just don't do anything about it. Give our listeners a way to engage.
Okay. Well, I'll share what I do. I am a senior citizen now. Okay. I can get the senior discount at Denny's for breakfast every day. So I would say what I'm learning to do, particularly with 20-somethings and even younger, even maybe a high school student, is an acronym that I practice. And I may have shared this the last time we were talking because I so believe this. But you remember how for years and years and years, we've used that little phrase, this is a leg you got to stand on, meaning this is something you can really bank on.
Mm-hmm.
ALEG is my steps into a conversation where I don't understand someone else, often a younger generation person, or maybe they don't understand me, but I want to lead the way. So the letters are ALEG if you're listening, listeners, or taking notes. The letter A reminds me, don't go into the conversation with a statement. Don't go in with a telling. I want to tell them what they did wrong. That's what I want to do because I just see that they need to be corrected. Well, I realize now I need to connect before I correct. So the letter A is ask. I need to get good at asking questions that prompt them to share why they did that wingnut, foul tip, knucklehead. I did that thing they just did, So I'm asking. And by the way, I am learning to listen now at my age. I love what Ernest Hemingway said. He said it takes 2 years for us to learn to speak. It takes 60 for us to learn to listen. I think that's where I am. So when I ask, they feel valued. Mm-hmm. Isn't it true when somebody asks, oh my gosh, he wants to know what I got to say? The letter L, it does very little good to ask unless I practice letter L, which is listening. Mm-hmm. I'm actively listening now to what they say. I think my generation very often thinks it's enough to pose a question and then pretend to listen. But I'm listening now, and now they feel heard. And by the way, the data shows one of the top 3 desires Gen Z has in the workplace is to have a voice. I want to be heard. The letter E, empathize. And that's a learned trait for me as well. And by the way, it's not that I never had compassion for anybody. As a male, I don't know if I knew how to express it. So when I empathize, I'm not only listening, but I'm volleying back with a facial expression or a word that says, oh my gosh, now I get it. Or, wow, I bet that made you feel horrible. Or, oh gosh, I had no idea. But when I'm expressing that, they're saying, I'm understood.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm valued, I'm heard, I'm understood. And then the letter G now is the very thing I wanted to do from the beginning, which is guide.
Mm-hmm.
As their supervisor, perhaps, I want to guide them. But at first, I've done 3 steps, which might have taken 10, 15 minutes. And I don't want to take that time. But now I've earned my right to guide them through not a badge, but a bridge of relationship. So that would be, I guess, my counsel there. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Tim. So it sparked something for me as you were talking.
Okay.
So I was doing a session not too long ago, and these managers were talking about how they were a little frustrated because they were finding in some of these Gen Zs they've hired, the quickly the conversation will start to move into mental health.
Yes.
And I'm a trained therapist. I'm so thrilled that we talk more and acknowledge mental health. And there's a line of appropriateness to where it can either be abused or kind of move into a realm that is not the expertise of that manager.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how have you seen mental health show up in your research? And what advice would you give to managers if they do have a Gen Z that says, hey, I want to talk about this topic outside of my kind of work performance, since you're my manager. What guidance might you offer around that?
If I was sitting down one-on-one with such a manager, I would say immediately, your first step, I don't care what you think about the reality of their anxiety, you need to make sure they feel that you get it, that this is real. You're validating what they're feeling. Now, do they need to grow up? Probably. So did I at their age. But I want to make sure, Randy, you and I have talked about this. It is so easy for me to go, are you kidding me? You're stressed out over that? So I think the first thing we need to do is let them know we understand them. I'll give you a good example. In one of my focus groups with Gen Z, this was out in California, I remember meeting Natalie. And at the time, I was talking about anxiety and stress, but we got onto some of the myths that older generations believe about Gen Z, like they're fragile snowflakes all the time, that sort of thing. And so I said, Natalie, I'll be honest with you. I've actually heard your supervisor, and I did know her supervisor, say that he wasn't really sure you're wanting to work, that you don't really have a work ethic, that at 5 o'clock you leave immediately and not a minute later. You don't finish even the task you're working on, and everybody else is, working a little bit later to finish their task and then go home. When I posed that out to Natalie, I learned. Natalie smiled at me, and she's 21, and she said, Dr. Elmore, can I tell you why I leave right at 5? I said, sure. She goes, I leave right at 5 because I have to rush right over to another job. I don't make enough money at this first one to pay my bills. And then she said, after that second job, I rush over to take care of my mother who has stage 4 cancer. Suddenly, her stress made sense to me. But you see, I assumed she had no work ethic, or, well, I didn't. Her boss does. And she said, I just wish he would even ask me what I'm facing right now. He assumes I'm fragile, but she probably has a better work ethic than her boss does. Probably isn't working 2 jobs. So one is I want to make sure they feel validated. But I think bosses, while they're not therapists, Brandon, like you perhaps, I think we need to talk to them about the fundamentals. So margin is one. Make sure they've got some margin. Sometimes I think their lives are so cluttered, they need some space, some margin in their day so that it's not so crowded and noisy all the time. I think this may sound very simple. I think we need to talk about movement. We are a very sedentary group of people, old and young. We're sitting at our computers most of the day. So are you moving? Are you moving? Are you moving? Another one is mindfulness. Now, I know that kind of sounds like some far out new age thing, but I think mindfulness can either be meditation on one hand, or it can just be stopping and focusing, being quiet and centering your thinking. I think sometimes we're stressed out because we're not very mindful. We're distracted, in fact. I think another one, these are fundamentals. This is the past dribble shoot of mental health. But I think leaders ought to talk to them about how they're managing their anxiety. And by the way, management might be you can manage your stress a little bit better. In fact, you know what? Can I stop and interrupt myself by saying, I think we've so empathized with Gen Z stress, we've not told them the truth, which is, hey, we're all stressed sometimes, you know?
Right.
I just heard school is starting this next week at the time of this recording. And schools were saying, oh, we're bringing in extra counselors because the new school year is kind of stressful. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. We were all stressed out, but parents said, I believe in you. You're going to be fine. This is your first day of school. And the belief in us allowed us and enabled us to handle stress. So we don't need just empathy. We need compassion, which I think is, and I so believe in you, my compassion is hold you accountable to handle the stressors that life naturally throws at you. So anyway, I probably should stop there. Maybe one more thing, Brandon. Sometimes mental health really, truly is a disorder, and maybe the management is, maybe some medication is necessary. I'm a diabetic. I take medication for my blood sugar levels. So I don't want to push too hard here, but let me tell you why I feel we're not leading Gen Z well. I have a friend who is in his 20s, and he just got out of the Navy. He served in the Navy for a number of years. And I said, how was your time in the U.S. Navy? He said, well, it was different than I thought. And I said, oh, really? How so? He said, well, in boot camp, our drill sergeant handed all of his cards to hold up if he said something that made us feel uncomfortable. I'm not kidding. And I'm thinking, oh my. I'm hoping it's more than I think. But to just lower the standard for, we can handle stressors. So we've got to hear them immediately and make sure they feel like we understand you are stressed. But I think we need to say, and I know you're capable of handling a lot of this. Let me know how I can help, but you can do this. So
I love that, Tim. I want to hand it back over to Randy here and pass the ball. But before I do that I think it's really important everyone hears that key point, whether we're parents or managers and leaders, to say, I believe in you. Yeah. I know you can do this. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to let you go do this.
That's right.
I'm not going to ride shotgun while you do this.
Yeah.
Because I think as parents, particularly when we ride shotgun all the time, we're signaling to that kiddo, well, we're trying to help, but we're signaling you're not enough.
Yeah.
You can't navigate the roads without me sitting shotgun. Yeah. And that creates anxiety and also maybe the desire to have that parent come with them on an interview. So I love this idea of really building that resilience by saying, you can do this.
Yep.
I'm cheering you on. I'm here if you need me, but you can do this. I just love that. I want everyone to hear that because I think that's so very important for us. Yeah. Okay. Randy.
Yeah.
I know you've got some questions for Tim.
Well, it's I think I'll make an observation and then this may turn into a question. Okay. There's a word that I have not heard you use today, Tim, and I want to kind of bring it up and see if you think that this is a good filter for leaders to use. Brandon and I love to always come at our clients with the practical. How do we help you take the complex, make it practical, easy to implement, and go forth? And as I've listened to you talk this morning, and I'm so grateful just for these amazing insights, it seems to me that you're really challenging leaders to check their assumptions.
Yes.
Leave your assumptions at the door.
Yeah.
And instead of, always thinking you've got all the answers, have the humility to understand that you don't know everything about this person. I love your example of Natalie. Natalie had a complex life filled with hard work and a little tragedy, and she was out there smiling and making the most of it. But she had been almost dismissed by her leaders because they only saw one dimension. Yeah. So I think check your assumptions, have the courage to, be open to learning, and then be curious and ask, as you said earlier, ask questions and learn about people, and also be willing to learn from our Gen Z employees. Yeah. I always tell my leaders and people I'm working with, mentorship is not a one-way conversation. It's a two-way conversation. Yeah. So I think this idea of checking your assumptions and be willing to engage and learn, I've heard that filtered into what you said today, but I wanted to kind of give it language. Is that something that you would agree with?
Absolutely. In fact, if you remember in our last conversation, we talked about reverse mentoring, which is a two-way street. So I meet with somebody that's 30 years younger than me or 40 years younger than me on the Growing Leaders team, and it's a two-way street. And I hope that they would say, I'm humble enough. I've checked we joke about check your ego and your logo at the door and just be humans. And we're both mentoring each other, but it's not a one-way street. So I think you're absolutely spot on. And I feel like, well, in the book, there's an entire chapter on the myths we've assumed are true about their life. And I, from my research, talk about the truth about each of these myths. Many of them, Randy and Brandon, they were my myths. And I learned so much as I wrote this book, and I actually met with them. I love what Brene Brown says. She's the research psychologist at University of Houston. She says, it's hard to hate people up close. Isn't that good? It's hard to hate people up close. And that's true. And I know hate's a strong word, but sitting down with them, I just fell in love with these young men and women who actually were very respectful, but very candid about their lives. And I didn't know at least half of it. So I'm glad you brought that up and underscored that, Randy. That's good.
So you were talking about myths, and many of them being your myths, Tim. So I hate to put you on the spot, but
no, it's true.
You are kind of on the hot seat today. So what was the myth that surprised you the most, that kind of got debunked in your research? Was there one that really stood out the most that you said, I really thought this was going to be the case, and turns out I was wrong?
Yeah. It's probably a second cousin to the Natalie story, where we thought she didn't have a work ethic and actually she did. I think one of the myths is that Gen Z is not loyal. They will not be loyal. And by the way, usually myths are adopted because there's a kernel of truth in some of it. So in 2020, you remember we went through the pandemic, and the first demographic that was let go when companies had to let people go was the youngest, newest employees.
Right.
But Gen Z felt that. And they thought, well, you weren't really loyal to me, Bob, back in the day. So why would you expect me to be blindly loyal here? And by the way, when they expressed this, I sat down with Chick-fil-A employees, Home Depot employees. I sat down with all kinds of industries. So I think one of them is we don't think they're loyal. I actually found they will be deeply loyal like any other generation, but it's usually loyal to a good boss or a good colleague rather than an institution. So we, because we're tenured, might feel, well, I'm loyal to my organization right here. Maybe we're more likely to be, but they will be loyal to people if there's a relationship built and there's belief expressed. High expectation, high belief. That's what we talked about today. If we'll do that, I think we'll find they're not going to be job hopping. The corporate lily pad could still become a corporate ladder that they'll climb if we'll build relationship and really believe. That was probably the biggest one that I had adjusted when I asked.
Beautiful, Tim. Thank you so much. Randy.
Yeah.
Can we fit in just one more quick question? And it may not be something that you address in the book. I'm still reading the book and love it. But there's so much being written right now about how difficult it is for Gen Z to find jobs.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are being impacted by AI, really coming in, taking over a lot of those basic functions that normally we would give to a young intern or new employee.
Yeah.
Do you have any, maybe advice for us, for leaders, for Gen Z on how to kind of think about that, how to deal with it? I'm curious if you have a take.
Yeah, sure do. It may not be the brilliant answer, but it's my answer. Okay. So I would say to a supervisor of a Gen Zer or directly to the Gen Zer, if you will build your emotional intelligence, you will most likely never be replaced by AI. Now, we don't know what 50 years from now is, but I'm telling you, when I'm able, and Randy, you work with college students and young professionals.
Yes.
When we build in them or help them cultivate EQ, not just IQ, that's IQ can be replaced by AI very easily. EQ, not so much. So, self-awareness, self-management, managing your emotions, managing your stress levels, relationship management, social awareness, those skill sets all fall under EQ. And what I tell Gen Z is this: the higher you go in your organization, the more emotional intelligence will be a factor in your paycheck and in your position. So I feel like that's what I would say. Build that and you'll be least or less likely to be let go because they can't replace you very easily. Fantastic advice, Tim. Thank you. Really great insight.
I love that. I mean, it feels like we're just getting warmed up. Unfortunately, it's time for us to land the plane. So, Tim, you know this question. We ask every guest on the Leadership Foundry podcast this question. What is one thing listeners today, managers, leaders today who are listening to this can do starting today to help their teams, particularly their Gen Z teams, thrive tomorrow?
Wow. That's a loaded question, Brandon. So I'm going to try to give it a 2 or 3 minute answer, not a 2 or 3 hour answer. One of the items I talk about in the book, I'll share now. I think leaders need to move from a gatekeeper mode of operation to a guide. Gatekeeper to guide. So for the last 40 or 50 years, leaders or bosses have been gatekeepers of the information, of the power, of the budget, you name it, gatekeepers. And it's not that that's evil or wicked, but I think the millennials and the Gen Zers coming in is going, you know what, buddy, you're not the gatekeeper. I can look stuff up and fact check you, or I can know as much as you do on a category just by YouTubing or Googling. So if we move from gatekeeper to guide, we now are in a more relational posture where we're learning as well as teaching, and we're moving forward in a marvelous way, seizing the gifts of the young as well as our gifts. So I would love to close with a story. One of my favorite stories, and I do tell this in the book, is the story that took place about 60 years ago with NASA. Everybody listening is probably very, very familiar with NASA, the space program of the United States. But I remember as a young kid when NASA landed a man on the moon in July of 1969. It all was birthed from the president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, twice making a speech in 1961 and 62, saying by the end of the decade, we will put a man on the moon. That's the story we all know. Now let me tell you the story behind the story. When JFK made that statement, we're going to put a man on the moon, NASA did not even have the technology to do such a thing. They were befuddled. They thought, oh my gosh, we need to scramble. He just made a public, vision, stated a vision. So what they did was they quickly realized, oh my gosh, we need to upgrade and update all of our systems and our computers here. Well, they had MIT interns. Here, we're back to MIT here. They had engineers coming in right out of college, 22, 23, 24, somewhere between 22 and 27 years old, that did know the latest technology, that had been working on the newest version of computers. So they were all so new that the veteran NASA team members said, I don't even know if I get these yet. It's going to be a long learning curve, and we're on a deadline. So get this. The average age of the operator at the control center for NASA when we landed Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon, 27 years old. In fact, the guy that said go, not no, that finally pulled the trigger when we put the capsule down, Jack Garman, 23 years old, 1 year out of college. So the veteran NASA team members were called SimSups, simulator supervisors. They were the mentors in their 40s and 50s, pouring in to these young operators. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, what a way forward. And when we landed the man on the moon, we had no idea. It was this barely graduated, hardly shaving yet young man at the control center saying, let's do this. Let's do this. So I just give that as a vision cast. I don't know how old you are listening, but I'm telling you, there's a whole new generation of young operators who would love a little bit of leash to be free, a little bit more flexibility where we're listening to them. Who knows what idea? You might have a Colin on your team right now that could take your organization to the whole next level if you just be willing to listen to him instead of tell him what the policy is. So that would be, I think, my response, Brandon, to that question.
Tim, my friend, that is a great, not only answer, but inspiring and touching story. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your gifts with us today.
Yes.
It's always just an absolute pleasure to have you on. You're a master teacher, a master storyteller, and really making a difference in this world. So thank you. And for those of you listening, be thinking about what's your one takeaway. Randy and I have a lot, and stay tuned. Randy and I will share ours shortly. But Tim, thank you again for coming on. Absolute gift. We look forward to the next time we get to have you grace us with your presence again. Randy, my friend, I absolutely always love our time with Tim. He is such a great storyteller. He brings such rich kind of context and description to situations that are generational. And then most importantly, he's really great at practical tips. So I have a list of takeaways from our conversation. I'm only going to hit a few, but I'm curious, what was maybe one of your takeaways from our conversation?
Listen, I thought it was one of our best episodes. Tim nailed it again, as you said. You know, you and I always tend to lean in really hard on the practical. We love for our clients and our listeners to get something practical out of every one of these shows. So what really kind of struck me was the reference to, I don't have a leg to stand on, or I have a leg to stand on. And he mentioned the acronym ALEG, which was really good, simple, practical advice. And what he's talking about is for managers of Gen Z, ALEG means to ask. Be curious, ask them questions. L in ALEG is listen, but actively listen. Really pay attention to what you're hearing, absorb the information. The E in ALEG is empathize. We really need to bring our empathetic mindset to this when we're having conversations with Gen Z. And then finally with G, it's then after you've done the first three, you've earned the right to guide them. So ALEG, I love that acronym. It was very practical, really struck me as interesting.
Yeah, I'll just build on it briefly. You know, one of the, and Tim's so good at alliteration, but he talks about going from gatekeeper to guide.
Yeah.
It really complements what you just said, and it reminds us too. Don't just be the gatekeeper, which is basically the no bird. No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. Right. This is the way we do things around here. This is the way we do things around here. Which you and I've talked about how dangerous that phrase can be. But don't be that. Be a person who's really trying to get to understand this employee, this team member, and support and guide them. Well, I know we're going to land the plane here in just a minute and officially close out. Did you have another takeaway from our conversation with Tim?
One very quick one. I love the story he gave about the GM supervisor and the young employee named Colin. Loved it. But what really got me in that story, very compelling story, was the supervisor represents what we see all the time, this sort of outdated way of leading, which is, hey, this is the way I grew up and did it. This is the way you must grow it. This is the way you must do it. And this supervisor had a process and a way of looking at the world that was very, very aligned with his generation. Well, Colin, the really gifted entrepreneurial new employee, has a different way of thinking. The supervisor never thought to compromise and adapt to Colin. He just said, no, this is the way we do it. Colin left and went on to become a millionaire and started 2 new companies. Great lesson there for us about willing to change, being willing to change and adapting.
Yeah, beautiful. And then to kind of land our plane here, you know, Tim did mention a few things around the difference between Gen Z and maybe millennials or Gen X or others. And he mentioned that, you know, maybe a little more independent or individual kind of work, but he also talked about the importance for us as leaders and managers to help them grow and nurture their emotional intelligence, their EQ. And we didn't talk about it practically speaking, but that's things like how to write those emails or how to have those conversations. We may take some of those things for granted, and that's an opportunity for us to guide and pour into this next generation.
Yes.
So as listeners, as you all were listening to the show today, Randy and I have our takeaways. The most important thing is, what were your takeaways? Doesn't matter what they are, but identify that one thing. That one thing you either want to start doing, stop doing, or continue doing. Because if we do that and we put that in play, it's going to be a great opportunity for not only you to thrive, but for all of us to help to grow and have this next generation thrive. Because after all, they are the future of the workplace.